Hello everyone, my name is Chris Reynolds and I'm very pleased to be giving you this overview of our Diverse Forages Project, which was a 5-year collaborative project with Rothamsted Northwick, Dutchy College, and Cotswold Seeds, led by the University of Reading and funded by the BBSRC through the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Innovation Club. The project's coming to an end now, and as an end of project event, we have a series of recordings that are going to be available online where we'll be presenting some of the results from our project, and some of our collaborators will be giving presentations as well. And then we'll have an online question and answer session and discussion session later in the week. One of the objectives of our study was to look at nitrogen use efficiency, both at an animal and also at a farm scale, when using multi-species swards without nitrogen fertilizer compared to perennial ryegrass swards with nitrogen fertilizer. Ruminants are relatively inefficient in their use of dietary nitrogen. It's a waste of purchased feed nitrogen and also a waste of nitrogen that's entering the system through fertilizer nitrogen. Of course, fertilizer nitrogen is very expensive. It has a high energy cost to produce, so it has a high carbon footprint. And so if we can rely more on legumes for fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere in crops, then we can potentially reduce the carbon footprint of our production systems and reduce the emissions of nitrous oxide and nitrate from fertilizer application. So more and more producers are utilizing clover in their grass swards to reduce nitrogen fertilizer requirements. But there's also a lot of interest in more diverse forage mixtures, more than just monocultures or binary cultures with grass and a clover. And many of these mixtures contain a number of different species of grasses and also of legumes, and they also often contain forbs or herbs such as plantain or chicory, and these are purported to have a number of benefits. There are, however, whilst there are a number of pros to the use of multi-species swards that are purported or have been demonstrated, there are also a number of cons as well. We know that if we're using legumes, that the swards are going to require less nitrogen fertilizer, and that then reduces the risk of releasing pollutants to the environment. There's evidence that because of different rooting depths and other attributes of the species used, that multi-species swards can improve soil structure and fertility. But the presence of many of these deeper rooting species can also improve resilience to extreme weather, especially drought, but also perhaps flooding conditions. There are antelmictic properties of some of the species, and they have benefits for animal health. And the different species are productive over different times of the year, so it spreads the production of the sward more evenly over the year. And there's also evidence from studies, including some of our work, that multi-species swards will reduce methane emissions. There are, however, some concerns. There are questions over the nutritional value of some of the swards and how we might analyze them. For example, we're not sure that our NIR equations are appropriate for some of the more diverse mixtures. The swards are very, very heterogeneous throughout the year, and from year to year, their success can vary by soil type, and you can often see a loss of some of the species in the swards over time. And all in all, they're more challenging to manage. Establishment can be a management concern, and also weed control. So based on all this, we started our project in 2016, so over 5 years ago. And the overall aim of the project was to determine if multi-species swards would achieve acceptable yield of good quality forage for livestock production whilst having a positive effect on the environment. Our project looked at 3 treatment swards compared to a perennial ryegrass sward, and I'll say a bit more in the next slide about the choice of species in our treatments. And the project had 5 work packages. Our first work package was an agronomy trial conducted over multiple locations to look at productive performance and composition of the swards. We also had a work package looking at forage utilization and nutritive value for grazing steers, and that was conducted at the Center for Dairy Research here at Reading. We had a number of demonstration farms that participated in our project and evaluated 2 of our mixtures on their commercial farms and participated in knowledge exchange activities. We had a work package looking at drought resilience, where we again obtained agronomy measurements at a very dry and a very wet site. And then Rothamsted Northwick conducted a series of nitrogen cycling and ecosystem services modeling exercises based on the data we obtained from the projects. And the results from these work packages are going to be presented by some of our colleagues and collaborators in the project as part of this online event this week. The experimental mixtures are shown here. Our control was a perennial ryegrass that received nitrogen fertilizer, and then we had 3 treatments with increasing species complexity. The choice of these species in these mixtures was based on a workshop that we held with stakeholders, including some of our demonstration farmers, and was also based on the experience we had from a number of previous projects at Reading and at other locations where multi-species swards had been evaluated, including a project in Ireland called Smartgrass. And one of the conclusions at the time from the first Smartgrass project was that a 6-species mixture containing perennial ryegrass and timothy as grasses, red clover and white clover as legumes, and plantain and chicory as herbs, performed as well as a more complex mixture. And therefore, our simplest mixture we called Smartgrass, which was this 6-species mixture. And those species were included in all 3 of our multi-species swards. Our most complex mixture was the herbal leys sold by Cotswold Seeds. And then Biomix was a mixture that was designed for the project, and it was based on previous experience. Hannah Jones helped the development of this species, mixture that we used here. And one of the focuses of this mixture was biodiversity and food for pollinators. So those were the treatments that we used. None of the multi-species swards mixtures received any nitrogen fertilizer over the course of the project. So those were the treatment mixtures that we used. And for the study, these were established in late summer of 2016. And then the performance of the mixtures was evaluated over 3 growing seasons, 2017 through 2019. And I'd like to now tell you a little bit about some of the methods that we use for our agronomy trials and for our forage quality and nutritive value trials. And then some of our co-investigators will tell you about the results of the work in more detail in other presentations. So for our agronomy work package, we established 4 replicates of each treatment at 4 sites in the south of England. 2 of the sites were at the University of Reading, at our Center for Dairy Research, along the River Loddon, and at our Crops Research Unit at Sonning along the River Thames. And then another site was at Duchy College in Stoke Clemson, and another site was at Rothamsted Northwick. So for each of these sites, we established 4 by 5 meter plots as replicates of each treatment. As I said before, the perennial ryegrass control received nitrogen fertilizer each year at 250 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, and our experimental treatments received no nitrogen fertilizer. For the agronomy plots, they were harvested when sufficient biomass was present, and we cut them to a 7-centimeter residual, which was something we spent a lot of time thinking about, but we decided that this would be how we would manage plots for grazing, and so we decided to manage all the treatments in the same way. So they were cut whenever there was sufficient biomass available, and it varied from 2 in a very dry year at some of the plot sites to as many as 5 cuts per year. But for 3 of those cuts only, we measured botanical composition using a destructive cut and also measured chemical composition. And that was based on quadrat sampling. For our work package on resilience, we also established similar agronomy plots that were managed in exactly the same way and sampled in the same way at 2 additional sites at Sonning. One was on a very dry site, which was prone to drought, and one at a very wet site near the river that was very prone to winter flooding. And so we obtained measurements from those sites for comparison to what we called our medium or our normal site at Sonning. For our grazing trials and forage quality evaluation studies at Cedar, we established 20 1-hectare paddocks in late summer of 2016, so there were 5 replicates of each of the 4 treatments. They were managed for conserved forage production in 2017, which provided us treatment haylage that was used for winter feeding trials and also provided buffer feeding during dry periods when we were grazing the paddocks. And then in 2018 and 2019, we conducted grazing studies with 10 steers per treatment each year, and they were 20 of the steers were Holstein and 20 of the steers were Holstein by Angus cross steers. So we measured their growth rate throughout the grazing season. And Dave Humphreys will be telling us more about the results from those grazing studies in another presentation. And then throughout those grazing seasons, every 3 weeks, 1 steer from each treatment, and that was a different steer each time, was brought indoors. They were indoors for 2 weeks. During the first week, they were adapted to a tie stall, and then in the second week, we did a total collection of feces and urine as a digestion trial to determine digestibility of the forage and of the nutrients in the forage. And we also measured nitrogen excretion in feces and urine to calculate nitrogen balance, and measured methane emission from the animals. And again, Dave will be telling us more about the results from those studies in his presentation. I will show you one set of data from the study, which is sort of the headline result from the study. And this is the average biomass yield of the plots over the 3 growing seasons. And this is the average across all the sites for each year. And you can see that in the first year of the study, the perennial ryegrass that received nitrogen fertilizer produced more biomass than the multi-species swards. But then in the second year, there was very little difference between the swards. This was a drier year, but I also think part of this is the fact that the legumes were more established by year 2. And then in the third year, the production of the multi-species swards that did not receive nitrogen fertilizer was actually greater than the production of the perennial ryegrass receiving nitrogen fertilizer. So we were very pleased to see these results. There were differences across the sites which you might expect, but these are the results that we obtained overall. So that's just a brief overview of the basis of the project and some of the work packages and the measurements that we were obtaining. I haven't said anything about our demonstration farms, but one of our demonstration farmers is participating in our online panel discussion, and we're very pleased about that. And I've also not said much about the modeling work, but Tom Misselbrook from Rothamsted will be giving a presentation on the modeling work that was done for the project. So just a few thoughts about where we are with multi-species swards. We do feel they're a very logical progression from binary mixtures of grass and clover. The use of the legumes reduces nitrogen fertilizer requirement, which is very important. But there also seem to be some benefits in terms of production compared to monocultures or more simple mixtures. There is good evidence of drought tolerance of some of the deeper rooting species, as you would expect, and evidence of improved soil structure and fertility. Some of those improvements, however, may be more long-term than short-term. We know there are anthelmintic benefits of some of the species in our swards, and there's good evidence of reduced methane, and Dave Humphreys will be talking about some of that. There are still some questions in terms of the guidelines for managing these multi-species swards, especially for different types of production systems, and depending on whether they're being used for conservation or for grazing. And finally, I'd just say that the multi-species swards is really not a new concept. It's something that was very popular in the 1930s and 1940s, but mixed pastures were phased out as we moved towards perennial ryegrass, which is very responsive to nitrogen fertilization. I do think we can learn, though, if we look back at some of the recommendations from some of the older textbook. There's some really good advice in there about how to manage multi-species swards that we can learn from. So just to say that the project lasted for over 6 years now, and it's represented a lot of hard work. And I hope you're going to be interested to see some of the results from some of that hard work. There have been a number of people that have contributed substantially to the project. Kirsty Hammond helped actually write the initial project proposal before going back to New Zealand. Marie Dittman was involved in the establishment of the mixtures at the various sites. Anna Thompson helped set up our sampling procedures at the start of the project, and then Zoe Barker's really seen the project home. And Sarah Shepard has been a PhD student working on the project who's made substantial contributions. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and hope that you enjoy the presentations for our online event.